Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's City Council study session for Monday, March 28th. We have 3 study session items on the docket for tonight. Leading off is Director Jackie Loh, who is here to present the February financial report. Good evening, Director.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm going to present the 2022 February financial report with you tonight. Through February 2022, the city's general fund receipts total $9.7 million. This amount to 16.5% of budgeted revenue, which is $740,000 higher, or 8.8% higher than the same time last year. As per council request, the PowerPoint slides have been changed. The one-time revenue expenditures for 2022 and 2021 are subtracted from the information. Those one-time items include $188,000 for sale of fire training academy building, the $138,000 savings from health insurance premium, and we also excluded $500,000 for 2021 sales tax received in January 2022. So this is the revenue. I want to mention the property tax. For the February property tax, we received $2.5 million on March 10th. Of the $2.5 million, $1.5 million is for city's general fund, $63,000 for EDDA, and the remaining $600,000 is for debt service for the Parks and Rec, Geo Bond, and the police office building. For the sales use tax, we receive $7 million, which is 20.1% of fiscal budgeted revenue, $739,000 higher than the same time last year. Another major revenue variances come from the license permit revenues, total $405,000, 22.1% of budgeted revenue. I want to mention the intergovernmental revenue, which is where we record ARPA. The city has been awarded $8.7 million, which will be received in 2 allocations. The first $4.3 million was received in June last year. We are going to receive the remaining $4.3 million in June this year. And last year we recorded $688,000 and plan to bring the budget supplemental to council. Originally, we're thinking to bring the budget supplemental to council for ARPA funding in April, but we thought about it. We had an internal conversation because water, sewer, stormwater have identified the spending, but it might be too early to determine how much will be spent in 2022. Additionally, the city will receive the remaining $4.3 million in June. That might change our 2022 ARPA funding allocation. So we're going to have an internal conversation and see, because we don't want to bring multiple budget supplementals for ARPA funding to council. We want to hopefully can consolidate the budget supplementals on a quarterly basis. Also, investment earnings, we had negative for $90,000 less than the same time last year due to a rising interest, because the majority of our portfolio is invested in bond. And you may be aware the Fed is going to increase the interest 6 times until the end of this year. This are sales use tax revenues, top 10 sales use tax revenue sources. Based on, you can see for 2022, our marketplace facilitators, manufacturing, and specialty sectors have the top 3, are the top 3 sources for our sales use taxes. And this will show the monthly comparison from 2019 to 2022. Again, the 2022 numbers exceeded the past 3 years receipts. Since 2018, from our use tax collections, we have received $6.9 million. We have seen the $6.9 million increases. This is sales tax map by areas. This is the sales use tax collection by area. We respond to council's prior request about why in Area 7 there are year-to-date 163 businesses are closed. We respond to council when we prepare the January financial. If you refer to council request tracker number 399, based on the January 2022 monthly financial, of the 133 business closed during the month, of that 108 of the business closed are from business area 7, which are business located outside the city limits. Excluding area 7, January 2022 reported a net of 8 closed business. This is just detail by areas. And let's talk about operating expenditures. I want to mention, you may notice that our expenditures are amended based on the first budget supplemental we presented to council on February 7th. So let me give you a count. The budget supplemental, the first budget supplemental of $257,000 for general fund, but we allocate $168,000 from the contingency line item, if you see, to across different departments for wage adjustments. And also of the 257, we added 35,000 to community development for their strategic plan, and also 54,000 to Parks and Rec to convert a position for part-time to full-time. Therefore, the rebudgeted budgeted operating deficit, if I go to the next slide, is 112,000 after first budget supplemental. If we see the total operating expenditures by department, I want to remind everyone the majority of the variances compared to the same time last year are due to the 3.5% salary increase for the employee across the board. Also, information technology has a higher spending due to timing for $200,000 software licenses. And in addition to comparing the expenditures by departments, we also want to compare expenditures by categories. So we put our expenditures into 5 categories, including personnel, commodities, contractual services, debt, and capital. The contractual services include the fire emergency services contract, software maintenance agreements, and property workers' compensation. And so you can see the contractual services, the variances are due to timing issue for IT for the once a year subscriptions. The commodities include items such as fuels, chemicals, and building supplies. And general fund capital is primarily the SURF vehicle management costs. So we want to compare the expenditures not only by departments, but also by categories. We also added one slide to show the operating surplus compared to last year. So last year, 2021, we had operating surplus of $460,000. This year, we have $512,000. You can also see the budgeted surplus and deficit compared to these 2 years. This slide includes the transfer in and transfer out. The transfer in is the money transfer from public improvement fund from the energy building project. And transfer out includes the budget supplemental. The $32,000 is for neighborhood sign design installation. Also, we transfer $150,000 from the general fund to fund 2022 EDDA budget as a loan. This slide, we changed the slide for our presentation purpose, because when we were compiling the slides for the reserve policy discussion later we're going to discuss with you, we feel if we can make all the terms consistent, with our 2016 reserve finance policy, it would be easier for you to understand and facilitate our conversation. Let's see 2021. We have beginning total fund balance and net change in fund balance. The net change in fund balance includes our operating surplus or deficit, plus transfer in and transfer out. So the total is 8.4 million, including all the budget supplementals. So you can see the 2021 ending total fund balance is 16.5 million. So what is the composition of our ending fund balance for 2021? There are different components. First is TABOR, restricted by the law, 1.7 million. And later, long-term assets reserve, which is committed internally by council. And also 689,000 is ARPA funding restricted by the federal. And the rest is unrestricted reserve, which currently is 16.7% of total revenue. Then you can see the dollar amount above all the designated fund balance. We call that unassigned fund balance at the end of 2021. At this juncture, before the final audit, is 4.7 million. And this is appendix for area sales tax slides for your reference, including the descriptions for each area. Oh, sorry. Which concludes my presentation tonight. Do you have any questions?
Thank you very much for the presentation, Director Loh. Any questions from council? Seeing none, Director Loh, thank you very much for the presentation. I think you're sticking around for the next one, right?
Yes.
Moving on to agenda item 2, speaking about an overview of the current reserve policy, and you are seeking direction from council regarding ratcheting and sliding policy. So I'll wait till you get to those slides, Director Loh. This study session topic is requested by Mayor Pro Tem Ward as staff to revisit reserve policy. I want to invite the Budget Administrator Jenny Nolan to the conversation. I want to give all the credit to her. She helped to compile the PowerPoint slide. And we are going to visit information from 2007 to 2021. And she not only has the expertise, but also the institutional knowledge to tell us the story behind the numbers. So I really want to invite her to be part of the discussion. And want to talk about agenda tonight. We want to review the purpose of fund balance and review the changes in general fund balance from 2007 to 2021. It will be very interesting to see in the past 14 years how many times we hit the unassigned fund balance or the reserve balance. And also want to review general funds reserve policy and review the Budget Advisory Committee's ratcheting and sliding reserve policy recommendation, review other jurisdictions' reserve policies. In your attachment, we include the 2016 adopted finance policies, also BAC's annual report recommendation for the reserve policy. And also in October 2020, the council requests memo about other municipalities' practices to tap into excess reserves to balance the budget. That's also in your packet. So I want to visit all these documents, all the research did in the past, included in tonight's discussion. So general fund balance, what is the purpose? It's essential to maintain adequate fund balance to mitigate current and future risks. So fund balance, rainy day fund, is also called the stabilization arrangements according to the FASB statement. It's a financial accounting board statement. The fund balance increases, decreases due to part operating surpluses or deficit, or transfer in and transfer out, or we can use that to supplement
the short-term operating deficits. So we talk about the excess unassigned fund balance during our financial report. So what can we do with the excess, the equity reserve level, which is unassigned fund balance in our conversation? It can be used to offset one-time expenditure, such as feasibility study, pilot programs, capital acquisition, construction, or backfill short-term operating deficit. This is a very interesting graph. This is show the general fund change in fund balance in the past 14 years. You can see there are 4 years we tap into the unassigned fund balance: 2009, 2010, 2015, and 2021. Some of the tap into unassigned fund balance due to operating deficit. Some are due to transfer out for our capital plans. So let's take a look at the details. It's a lot of numbers. You can see the presentation. We have revenue expenditures to show operating revenue expenses, it's operating deficit or surplus. Then we have a transfer in and transfer out, and show the net change in fund balance, the beginning fund balance, ending fund balance. We also calculate the unrestricted reserve based on 16.7%, which is our current policy, and 12% and 8%. We just want to see what is the adequate level for the reserve policy. It's a very interesting. We all know 2008 is a great recession. It took the city 4 years to recover from the Great Recession. And interestingly, the city did not touch the reserve, but the city did touch the unassigned fund balance to help the city to rebuild its operations. So just want to see how we have been using the unassigned fund balance in the past, and how this practice to help us to position ourselves for the future unforeseen activities. And this is a 2015 to 2022. 2015, interesting. We break even, but we had a huge transfer out. So I want to have Jenny to speak into it. I don't want you to take too lightly about the recovery city went through after the Great Recession. The numbers look good. We didn't attach reserve policy, but the process can be challenging. So I wanted Jenny to tell us a story, what's behind these numbers.
Thank you, Jackie. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. As Jackie mentioned, the Great Recession that we all experienced, not only here nationally, but worldwide, started around 2008. The city encountered it. We noticed a drop in revenues from 2009, and we recovered pretty much fully by 2012. But as you can see by the net operating deficits in 2019 through 2012, if we did not have access to other funds that we were able to tap in one time, and also we had positions that became vacant that we did not fill during this time period, and also requesting of employees to take furlough days. These were various mechanisms that we tried to backfill that deficit during those period. And then once we recovered from the Great Recession, we realized we had quite a backfill of deferred maintenance of our capital items. So you'll start seeing that we're transferring out in 2015 and later to the capital projects funds in order to start building back our capital and getting it, back to the level that it should be.
Could you also tell us what a transfer in includes? What other funds would transfer money from into the general?
Oh, yes. We did transfer one-time money from our internal service funds. Some money came out of the SURF fund the Service Center Fund, Risk Management Fund, and the Employee Benefit Fund. I do not have those specific dollar amounts in front of me tonight, but if you are interested, I can definitely pull that information together for you.
Great, thank you. So I want to
You're welcome.
reference point, the unrestricted reserve 16.7%, that's equivalent to 2 months of operating budget. 12% is probably 1 month, and 8% is less than 1 month. So just want to give you a reference point. And this is just give you a composition of the fund balance. We review the beginning, ending fund balance and net change in fund balance. Let's compare the original budget for 2021, amended a budget after all the budget supplementals and transfer out for the capital improvement projects, and unaudited actuals. You can see the last line, unassigned fund balance. Original budget, we're thinking we had at 4.6 million, and amended budget, we over drew into the fund balance. But remember, of the total transfer out, 11 million, which include 2.8 million COP, which has not been spent yet. We are going to reappropriate the 2.8 million in 2022. But this is the actual how we end 2021. We had close to 5 million unassigned fund balance after the unrestricted reserve at a 16.7%. So now we know the historical trend and our current fund balance position. Let's talk about the current general fund reserve policy and BAC's recommendation. This current policy was adopted in 2016 as our current finance policies. So Jenny, could you give us a background overview of this policy?
Sure. And just wanted to let everybody know that prior to 2016, we had an informal reserve policy or a unreserved, unassigned fund balance that we wanted to maintain even while we were going through the Great Recession. And we typically had a 9 to 10% unreserved or unassigned fund balance that we were able to dip into in the event that we needed to. So out of our, at the start of 2016, we did we hired a financial consultant to help us construct a financial policy that we could use going forward. And out of that, they were referencing the Governmental Financial Officers Association, or GFOA, and looking at other industry best practices. And the result of it was to have no less than 2 months or 16.7% of operating revenues or expenditures, whichever was most predictable, as a reserve, so that in the event that you needed to, you could actually tap into those funds, not for very long, but it was just a nice security blanket in addition to our Tabor funds that we had, as well as our later funds at the time we had as well. You could reduce this 2 months if you had predictable contingencies such as higher revenue diversification or less volatile sales and use tax. And then also, as you're looking at your long-term forecasting, they recommended to avoid even relying on unrestricted fund balance as you're putting together your long-term forecast. So don't even consider that as you're forecasting out your revenues and your expenditures. And then lastly, understanding that the various components of your fund balance, you're going to have a little bit of flexibility in tapping into those funds as you need. So initially, when you have unassigned fund balance, you have the most flexibility of appropriating those funds either towards operations or capital, whichever council prefers. If you do not have those funds available, and then you start tapping into your unreserved or unrestricted reserve, that's starting to tell you that it's okay to do that one time or two times, but understand that if you're relying on those funds, it's not sustainable. And then if you not only go or use those funds up, and then you start looking at, okay, any committed funds that council may have. Council at their discretion could eventually tap in and use those funds if the economic conditions warranted it. And then the last category of funds, the Tabor Emergency Reserves Fund, is the last resort, basically, because those funds have to be replenished within the following year of usage. So if you tap into those, it's pretty serious, I would say.
Thank you, Jenny. Now let's
You're welcome.
compare these two policies. Let's see the pros and cons of each one. The operating reserve currently is 16.7% revenues or expenditures, whatever is more predictable. But for city, in the past 6 years, we have been using revenue as a baseline because we feel the revenue is more predictable. The pros of this methodology is provides healthy reserve level to mitigate against revenue shortfall or higher than expected expenditures. A calculation reserve policy is based on relative predictable, easy revenue expenditures amounts. The cons is the percentage rate does not take into consider the historical use of fund balance, like the exercise we just went through earlier. Also, the national standard percentage rate may be too high or too low given each municipality's special condition. When we review the other municipalities' policy, we can see how they change the percentage according to their specifics. And the ratcheting and sliding reserve methodology recommended by BAC, it provided for each budget year where revenue exceeds projection and the reserve will increase by predetermined ratio percentage. For example, if revenue exceeds projection, the difference, let's say 50 million in revenue, and the actual is 51 million, the difference, 1 million, we can apply a percentage to the 1 million and add the $500,000 to the reserve policy. Or if the revenue is below projections, and the reserve target will slide down by the deficit amount. The BAC members believe that the ratcheting sliding component to the reserve policy would demonstrate a thoughtful process and give us more flexibility. And let's consider the pros and cons. The pros consider economic impact fluctuating revenue during economic prosperity or downtime and establish reserve range that provides flexibility depending upon the economic conditions. But the cons is reserve increases based on revenue variances compared to the budget and without considering the expenditure side. If councils are familiar with our budgeting techniques, we tend to be very conservative our revenue. I would say we will have a very prosperous year every year because our actual will absolutely exceed our projection. If that's the case, how do we determine economic prosperity or downturn? Or also, if the projection is very close to the actual, then we have very small margin or delta to be added to the reserve policy. So how long it would take us to rebuild the reserve policy balance. The second one is the actual expenditure revenue analysis not taken into account under the policy. I feel it's very important to consider revenue expenditure and the interplay between revenue expenditure and interdependency. A lot of time we have to spend in order to get more revenue. So I feel these revenues and expenditure need to be considered at the same time. However, this methodology, we want to borrow its spirit. So the staff will provide an alternative by implementing the spirit of this policy, but with a little twist. All the hard work pays off. So I want to have Jenny to review the other jurisdictions fund balance reserve policy. It was done in 2020. Jenny?
Yes, we had a council request back in August of 2020, and we did survey surrounding jurisdictions regarding their fund balance policy. And rather than read the information that you've already had through this council request, I just would like to go over at a high level the percentages that each one of the cities use in their fund balance to help mitigate against revenue shortfalls and overspends in expenditures. So for the city of Littleton, all of the cities have a TABOR reserve requirement that is required by law. So, and that is roughly 3% of your operating expenditures, give or take. The city of Littleton has a bit of a ratcheting and sliding approach to their operating reserves. At a low end or at their base level would be 8%, and they could increase that operating reserve up to 15%. So during economic good times, they could raise that operating reserve up to 15% of their operating revenues or expenditures. And then during times of economic downturn, they could ratchet it down to 8% before having to make any drastic cuts or changes in their budgets. For the city of Denver, you're going to notice that they have a 2% cushion for contingencies or unexpected expenditures that they may need to budget for. And within the city, we do have a contingency fund. It's between 1% and 2% of our general fund revenues. And then they do maintain, or they try to maintain, an unassigned fund balance of approximately 15%. In the city of Greenwood Village, they are cash rich. They're able to have an operating reserve of about 25%. They do have typical stipulations similar to us that we would see council's request if we had to carry over encumbrances from a prior year to be paid in the following year. Also, if we were wanting to dip into or appropriate funds from our unassigned fund balance, again, that would require council's request. Or if we needed to transfer funds from the general fund to a capital projects fund, that as well would require council's approval. And then the last city we compared ourselves to was the city of Sheridan. And even though GFOA recommends a 2-month reserve policy, they went a little bit further. They felt comfortable having a 3 months reserve policy for their general fund.
Thank you, Jenny. So we could have 3 alternatives when we approach reserve policy. First, status quo. Keep the unrestricted reserve at 16.7%. This policy was adopted in 2016, only 6 years ago. We can continue using this approach to use 16.7% operating revenue or expenditure, whichever is more predictable. Or alternative 2, we could incorporate the ratcheting and sliding methodology. We borrow the spirit. Unrestricted reserve minimum maximum level are set between 8% and 12%. But depending upon the unassigned fund balance, if the unassigned fund balance is positive, we can allocate any excess to the capital project fund. But if the unassigned fund balance is negative, which can be backfilled by the unrestricted reserve, which is 16.7, 12%, which is replenished based on the future annual positive unassigned fund balance up to the maximum level. So we borrow the spirit, but we consider this methodology in conjunction with unassigned fund balance. And number 3,
I think, Jackie, we had a duplicate slide. Yep, sorry.
okay, we set unrestricted reserves amount equal to 12% instead of 16.7%, but we still want to consider the unassigned fund balance, if that's a positive or negative. So there are 3 alternatives for council to consider.
Mayor, sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead.
I just got noticed that YouTube is not broadcasting right now.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. City Clerk, are you able to provide some notice? Actually, we'll take a brief break, or a pause, I guess I should say, to make sure that this is being streamed. Hold your thought, Director Loh. Oh, yeah? Okay. Thanks for troubleshooting. right. Yeah, why didn't you get up? Okay. It sounds like we could take a brief pause on this. Take about a 5-minute break and then make sure that this is up and running. So we'll meet back again around 6:43 or so.